Hi, welcome to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. This June 4th marks the 29-year anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre, or as they call it in China. But while the Chinese Communist Party encourages people's collective amnesia, there's one Tiananmen survivor who's dedicated his life to making sure people remember. I sat down with Fang Zheng at the Oslo Freedom Forum. Thank you for joining me on China Uncensored, Fang Zheng.
你好。
Hello.
So, why did you join the student protests in 1989?
我觉得很自然，因为
It was very natural.
我是一个大学
I was a
4年级
senior
的
in
学
college
生
at the time,
像那个时候的
and
所有
like
的
all
年
of the
轻人
young
一
people
样
at the
我
time,
们那个时候对
we
这个
were
国
full
家
of
还
hope
是
for our
充满
country.
希望，也
We
很
loved our
爱这
country.
个国家，很
We
愿意
wanted to express our
想
wishes so
表达
that the
自己的一
country
个
could
愿
be
望，使
even
这个
better.
国家变得更好。
So in 1989,
当
during
89
the
年的
student
时候，
protests,
人
we
们
brought up
学生
issues
运动
such
中我们
as
提出的这些
eliminating government
反
corruption
腐
and
败、反
profiteering
官导，希望有
and
更多
wanting
的
greater freedoms.
自由，
These appeals
这
were
种
our
呼吁，
aspirations,
当然
so of
这
course
是
I
我们
joined
的
the
愿望，
protests.
所以我当然会参加到当中去。
So you say you were there because you loved your country, but it became clear that the Communist Party maybe didn't feel the same way about the students.
对，这就是中国当时的一个真正的悲剧。
Yes, this
它的
was a
执政党
huge
中国共产
tragedy.
党，它更在于
The
它的
Communist
说
Party cared more about
可
its
能
power.
就是在那个时候，
They
它把
separated
党
the
的利益
interests
和
of the
人民的利
Communist
益
Party
进
from
行
the
了分割。
interests of the
虽然
people.
共产党口口声声说它代表人
Even
民
though the
但
party
在那
said
一刻
that
我
they
们真正的
represent
感受
the
到
people's
它把党的
interests,
利益放在
at the
了
time we
人民
truly
的
experienced
利
how
益
the
之
party
上。
put its
所
own
以
interests
面
above the
对我们
people's
这种
interests.
的这
When
种民
faced
意，
with the will of the
它
people,
选
they
用的是
chose to
用
use
军事
military
镇压的方
repression
式，
and
用威胁的
bloodshed.
方式
It was a
来
real
解
tragedy.
决。所以这个真的是一个悲剧。
I think in a lot of people's minds, the image that comes to mind when they think of Tiananmen Square massacre is Tank Man. One man stopping a row of tanks. I think what a lot of people in the West don't know is that most of the tanks did not stop.
其实这是两种不同的景象。
Actually,
那么各位
these are
大家
two
所知
different
道的是
scenes.
那张坦克人的照
Yes,
片。
many
是
people
确实，
think of
但
the
是那个
Tank
事件
Man
是发生
photo,
在6月5号。
but that
那么
happened
在
on
6月
June
5号
5th.
确实有这么一位
On
勇
June
敢的
5th,
年
there
轻人，
was this
他只
courageous
身地
young
走
man
在街
who
头，
walked
阻
into
拦住了一
Chang'an
队
Avenue
坦克，
and stopped a
这
row
个
of
坦克最终
tanks.
是停了下来，
The tanks did
这
stop,
成了一个世
and
界
that
著名
became
的
a
照片，
famous
一个象征。
photograph, a
但是在这
symbol.
之前是6月
But
4
many
号，
people
很
don't
多人并
know
不知
that the
道，
Chinese
真正
Communist
这一
Party's
幕的屠杀是
massacre
从6
really
月3号
started
晚上到
before
6月
that,
4号。
on
那
the
么
night of
我
June
个人的遭
3rd
遇
to
就是在
June
6月
4th.
4号，同样也
My
是在
own
长安街上。
misfortune is that on June
6月
4th,
4号上午的
around
6点
6
钟，
a.m.,
那么中国政
I
府
was
的坦
also
克
on Chang'an
面对
Avenue. But this
人
time,
群，
when
它并没
faced
有
with a
停
crowd
下，
of people,
它是从
the
身后
Chinese
直接的
government's
冲杀，
tanks did not
在
stop.
长安街
They
造
charged
成了一
us
个很大
directly
的
from
一个惨
behind
案，
and
很
killed
多
many
人
people
死
on
于
Chang'an
坦克
Avenue,
下。我
creating
也
a
是
huge tragedy.
被
I
坦
was
克碾
crushed by
压
a
失去
tank
了
and
方
lost
向。
both of my legs.
所以
So I
我
want
就
to
想
let
要告诉
everyone
大家，
know that
在
during
6
the
次镇压
Tiananmen
中，
Square massacre,
坦克
in
人、
terms
坦克
of
和
the
人这么
relationship
一种关系，
between tanks
坦克
and
板只代表
people,
了一个方面，
Tank Man
但是
represents
更
one
重要的一个
part,
方面就
but the
是
tanks
坦克
also
真正
really
的
attacked
碾
and
压
crushed many
袭击
people,
了很
and
多
I
人。
hope everyone can
所以这
remember
个事
this.
件，我希望大家记住。
You were there with students from your university. Well, what happened when you got word that the tanks were coming?
那个时候其实我们
At the
是从
time, we
天安
were
门广
already
场撤出，
retreating from
从
Tiananmen
广场
Square,
撤回学校的这个
retreating back
路
to our
途当中，当我们
universities.
走到西长安街6
We
步口
had
这个位置，
reached West
其实在那
Chang'an
里我们并
Avenue
没有
and
想到
Liubukou
坦克
Street.
会从身后
We didn't
高速
think
地
that the
冲杀
tanks
我
would
们，
rush us
因
from
为在那个
behind.
时候坦克已经占领
At
了
that
天安门
point,
广
the
场，
tanks had
我们
already
已经
taken
从
over
天安门广
Tiananmen
场在往
Square.
外撤
We
退，
were
所以
withdrawing
我们
from the
完全没有
square,
想
so we
到
never
坦
thought that
克
the tanks would
在我们
attack
的
us
身
from
后
behind.
高速地冲杀我们。
The
而
tanks
且他在
also
坦克
threw
来之
smoke
前，还
bombs,
从坦克里
which
释
were
放出了
exploding
核子弹。
around us,
那么这个核子
causing
弹在我们
chaos.
身边爆炸，引起整个混乱，也看不清楚。所以
We
说到
couldn't see
说实话，
clearly.
直
To
到
tell the
坦克
truth,
到我
we
们跟
couldn't
前，
see
我
the
们才
tanks
知道
until
坦
they
克
were
来了。
quite
其
close
实在
to
这之
us.
前，我们并没有看
We
见
didn't know the
坦克
tanks
从
were
我们
coming
身
and
后
charging towards
追
us.
杀过来，
Because they
因
came
为
from
都是从
behind,
后
we
面
didn't know.
并不知道。
So what happened when the tanks caught up to you?
对，所以在那个时候，在那个路段，
It was very
大家很慌
chaotic in
乱。
that
因为
section
当
of
时
the
正
road.
好有
At
一
that
位
point,
和我
I
走
was
在一起的
walking
一
with a
个
young
年
woman
轻的
from
女
my
也是我们
university,
走在一起，
and she
可能她当
fainted
时
from the
被
smoke.
毒气熏晕了，
I was
所以
trying
我
to
当时
help
主要
her,
是为了
so I
帮助
picked
她
her up
让
and
她
turned
抱着我向
around.
路边转移。这个时间非常的
Very
但
quickly,
正在这
just
个
as
转
I
移
turned
过程
around,
中，坦克已
the
经
tanks
快速
drove
地
up to
开
us.
到了我们跟前，所以几乎没
I
有
didn't
时
have
间
any
去
time to run
跟
or
坦克
hide.
躲避和 逃跑。
I could only push the young woman to a safe spot,
推到一个安全
but I myself was
那么
crushed
我
by a
自己被
tank.
坦克碾压过去。
Of the other people who were in that same part of the road at the same time, we know that at least 11 people were crushed to death, and many others were injured like me.
还有好几位像我这样受伤。
What was going through your head when you got hit by the tank?
这个不会有什么想。
You can't say you were thinking about anything, because you can't really think. It was only 3 to 5 seconds from when I first saw the tank to when I felt it crushing me and lost consciousness. I wasn't thinking about much. I felt a few things. I felt the tank starting to roll over me. It felt like I was being squeezed. I also felt, right before losing consciousness, I had some awareness, and the last thing I remember is seeing the white of my bone sticking out of my leg. That was the last image before I lost consciousness. It happened very quickly.
仅此而已，时间非常短暂。
So, you were a prominent student athlete at the time. What did the Communist Party say happened to you?
当然，6·4镇压之后，中国是一种全面的一种
Of course, after the June 4th Tiananmen Square massacre, the entire country was in a state of total censorship and total control.
政治气氛当然非常的不一样。
The political atmosphere was totally different. For the students like me who had been injured, the first thing they wanted was for us to shut up. They didn't want us to tell other people the truth of what had happened to us. They put a lot of pressure on me. Of course, they didn't even admit that a tank crushed me. They didn't want me to say that fact. They wanted me to change my story. They even put a lot of pressure on the young woman who I rescued, until she was afraid to see me, and she denied the fact that we were together when the tanks came. The Chinese government has all the power. If you don't come to terms with them, they'll stop you from going to college, from graduating. You can't get a job, you'll have no income, or they'll put all sorts of pressure on your family members. So a lot of people will choose to lie, or to comply with what the government wants. A lot of people did this, but I'm glad that I did not compromise. I persisted in telling my real story, my real experiences to everyone. That's why afterwards I suffered a lot of injustice and persecution. Not having freedom, being arrested, having my house searched, not being able to get a job, etc. The price of telling the truth in China is still quite high. That is the current reality.
说实话的代价，在中国还是蛮大的，这就是一个中国现实的一种状况。
Why did you insist on telling the truth?
因为我觉得
Because I felt that it was quite simple. A person should not have to deny the basic truth of his own experiences. I think you first of all have to be responsible to yourself. I also persisted because the Chinese government is afraid of us telling the truth, because they know the crimes they committed on June 4th, and they are afraid that everyone will know. So even though it was hard, I think persevering was worth it.
我觉得坚持还是值得的。
You must have felt a lot of despair during all of this. How did you carry on?
对，那时候是有很多绝望、很多的遗憾的地方。
I did feel a lot of despair and regret, but I was still surrounded by the love and care of my family and friends. There are still many people out there who care about justice and have a conscience. The people around me gave me a lot of love and encouragement. My family and friends are one of the main reasons I could keep this up until today.
家庭和周围的朋友。
So even afterwards, you were a very accomplished athlete, but you weren't allowed to participate in international events. Why was that?
对，其实当时中国政府，我想。
I think that one of the Chinese government's biggest worries, it was afraid that other people would find out how I was really injured. A lot of people actually already knew. But for the Chinese government, the more they could bury it, the better. So they took away my right to compete in international games and stopped me from having the opportunity to participate in athletic events for the disabled. For all these years, the main reason was to cover up the truth and bury the facts. They don't want people to bring up June 4th. They don't want people to know about June 4th.
Why is the Communist Party so afraid?
Of course, everyone knows that a criminal is afraid that their crimes will be exposed, and they know that they committed a huge crime back then. Criminals don't want people to know about their crimes. That's quite natural. In terms of both the international community and in China, for the past 29 years, they've used propaganda and other methods to cover up the truth. And they have been successful to a certain degree. Many young people barely know anything about what happened back then. There's almost no way for them to get this information. And through these cover-up methods and propaganda, the international community also pays less and less attention to this issue. So they've been able to get away with their crimes until today. So I feel like they've basically succeeded.
If so much of the world is forgetting what happened, why do you still speak out about the Tiananmen Square massacre?
There are two main reasons. One is that this is something that happened to me personally. Of course, I don't want people to forget something that I experienced. But the more important reason is that after June 4th, the Chinese government still continued its repression and persecution. The June 4th incident is not over. It's not finished. For example, the victims of June 4th still suffer persecution in China. The Tiananmen mothers whose children were killed have still not received justice. The June 4th issue has never been truly resolved. The truth has not been revealed. It's not clear to people. How many people died on June 4th? Who made the decision? Why did the tanks come after us to kill us? All of these things, there is no truth. Until the truth is uncovered, I must speak out to remind everyone not to forget.
How were you able to leave China?
After 1989, I had no freedom for a long time. So getting a passport was even more out of the question. During the 2008 Beijing Olympics, I had a chance to get a Chinese passport as a type of exchange with the government. In 2008, the international community had a lot of requirements toward China, and China had made a lot of promises to the international community, like letting in journalists to do interviews. At that time, I had many interactions with foreign journalists who came to my hometown to interview me. At the time, the Chinese government was most worried about keeping me in my hometown. As long as I didn't go to Beijing, it was okay. Before this, I had applied for a passport many times, because I felt this was part of the normal rights of a citizen, but they refused me each time. The Domestic Security Bureau told me they couldn't give me a passport. But one day between the Olympics and the Paralympics, there was a German reporter who called me from Beijing. He wanted to come interview me. I knew him, and so I said yes. We arranged a time to meet. He also wanted me to take him to interview another disabled person. But 2 hours before we were going to meet, the police found out about it. They were either tapping my phone or the reporter's phone. They came to my house and took me away for a chat. They told me that they knew a reporter was coming to interview me. They told me, "We can let you speak to him, but we can't let you take him to interview other people. We can give you two choices. If you cooperate with us, we can consider giving you a passport. But if you want to go with him and take him to interview others, we can't give you a passport." So I met with the reporter and told him the police knew he was here,
所以后来我就
that they already
到了约定的时
visited
间，我
me
就
and they
告
knew
诉
what we were
我
going
跟
to
他讲，
do.
我说包哥，你来中国
He was
公安
very
局知道
nervous about how the
刚刚找
police
了我
managed to
然后跟
find
警察
him.
说啊，我这个怎么
We were meeting in a
被我还知
hotel,
道
and
了
there
盯
were
上我
many
了
people
因
who
为当时
looked
我们
like
在酒
plainclothes
店见面
police
的时候
there.
周围是有很多可疑的
I
人
told him
在
the
这
whole
些人家
situation
便衣
about how the police wouldn't let me go with him to interview
反
another
正这些都不是秘
disabled
密
person.
啊，但是我只是要
And
告
if
诉你
I went, there
公
would be
安是不允许我
consequences for
陪
everyone.
你去采访
But
另
if I
外一个
didn't go,
参
they
见
would give me
参
a
见一个后
passport.
的故事，他不允许我去。那么如果我要去的话呢，可能就会大家都会有麻烦。
The
如果不去
reporter decided to give up on the other interview.
当时答应就给我护照。
He said, even if I just report the story of what happened with you and the
算了，我
police,
也就放弃了
that's
这次
still a
采访
pretty
那本身
significant
你这
story.
你发生的这些事儿，
So
我
we
回去
didn't
把它
end
报
up
道出
working
来，
together
也
and
是一
going
个
to
很
interview
有
other
意义的
people.
一个小
And
故
he
事。
left to go to
所以后来就
Sichuan
这
to
样，
interview others.
我就没有我们俩的这种去采访别
He
人
then
啊，去
published
这
the
种
story of my
争取
encounter with the
他
police
也没有去
in a
到了
newspaper
四
when
川
he
去访
returned to
他也
Germany.
当然，我的这个故事他
The
后来
Public
写在
Security
了
Bureau
我的
felt that I
这
had
个报纸
cooperated
上。
with their
那么
request
当然，
and
公
didn't
安这
cause
边
them
也
more
觉得我
trouble,
算
so
是
they gave me
答
a
应他了以
passport
后
on
要
August
求没
28th,
有给他
2008.
惹出更大的麻烦，所以就在那一天8月28号给了我护照。就
In
这样，我才拿到
2009,
了
with the help
2018
of the
年拿
US
到了护
government,
照，才有机会到
my family and
2009
I were
年
able to
才
come to
获得美国
America.
政府的帮助，我们全家才到美国。
You've said the most effective weapon against the Chinese Communist Party is not to forget what they want you to forget. Why is that?
当然，其实很多时候
This has been one of the most difficult problems in China under the Chinese Communist Party's rule, this type of memory war. The Chinese Communist Party has continuously committed crimes against the Chinese people during different periods of history, over and over again, from when it first started to rule to the present day, almost 70 years now.
但是为什么人民
But why
一
is
直
it
还
still
继续在
successful?
他一直能够继续成
The
功？
biggest
其实最
reason
重要的原因
is that
就是
through
他通过洗脑
propaganda,
通过宣
brainwashing,
传
and
通过
thought
各
control,
种
they've
信息
made
和这
people
种思
unaware
想
of
的
what
控制，
happened in the
使得人们
past.
对以前的历
They've
史都不太了
separated
解，
each
所以
part of
割
the
裂，
past
就一道
over
让
and
不
over
断地割裂。
again.
那么以前的最
So
新鲜
young
的人并
people
不
will
知道他
have
过
no
去，
idea
所以
about
只
the
对他还
crimes
有
the
希
party
望，还
has
有幻
committed
想。
in the
那么这
past,
样他就可以
so
一
they
直
will
在
still
延续，
believe
他
and
就
have
控
illusions
制
about the
他的这种
party.
方式一直得以
In
成
this
功。
way, the party will
所
be
以反
able
过
to
来说，如果
continue
我
their
们
rule, and their
打
methods
破
are
他这种，
working.
那么让他的这
But
种
if we expose
错误
their
他
errors
的
and
罪
their
行
crimes
能
and
够
let people know
让
about the
更多的人
past
去连续的去知
continuously,
道，所以这种记
so
忆
that
不
the
要中
memory
断
is
的话，
not broken
那么他
off,
的统治就会更加
it
的
will be
困难。
harder for
我
them
想
to
他的罪
rule,
行就不能那么
harder
容
for
易的
them
去延
to
续。
continue their
同样的道理，就
crimes.
像当年纳粹的罪
It's a
行，
similar
那么纳
principle
粹
to how,
在二
after
战之
World
后，在
War
欧洲
II, the
很快的
Nazis
不
couldn't
太可能再有
continue.
可能
They
延
were
续，很快的就
destroyed
灰飞
because
烟灭，
how the
就是因为
Europeans
我在
and
欧
the
洲人，
Jewish
包括
people
犹太人
exposed the
对纳
Nazis'
粹罪行的
crimes.
这种揭露，
They
这种记忆
publicized
的
them
保存，
and kept the
这
memory
种宣
alive
传做得非常
so
好，
that people
使得
could
人们
fully
充分的了
understand
解
their
他的罪行，
crimes,
因为他就不
and
太
they
可
could
能能
not
够记住。
continue.
反过来对中国
But
对
in
对共产党
China,
的
we
这种罪
haven't
行
done this with the Chinese Communist
没有做得
Party's
这样，
crimes,
所
so
以
they
它
have been
能够
able
一
to
直在继续
continue.
延续。那
This
这
is
是
one
我
way
需
we
要
can
跟它
oppose
进行
them.
对抗的一个方面。
This is the
我们记忆
resistance
的
of
对抗
memory.
就像当年我们
When
我
we
们
were
在年轻
young,
的时候，
because of
因
our
为受到这
brainwashed
种教育和洗
education,
脑，我们对
we did not know
以
many
前
of the
的
things the
中国以
Communist
前
Party
国家
had
这
done
个
in
可能
China's
是我们并不知
past.
道。同样，现在
Today,
很多
many
年
young
轻人，
people
尤其
growing
是
up in
在中
China
国，
with
他的信息丰
information
富，他的
control
这种洗
and
脑
this
教育，
brainwashed
他们也不知道，
education
很多人
also
并
don't
不知
know
道
what
我们大
happened
年
on
6
June
4
4th.
这
Each
些事情，
generation is
这是一代一
separated.
代都是
History is
断下来的
isolated.
历
The
史是
truth is
这
severed.
种真
That
真
means
相
we
都已经是
haven't done
断的，
enough.
所以这
So one of
证
my
明我们做
biggest
的不够。
responsibilities
所以
now
我当然现
is
在
to
就
tell
围绕
more
着这个
people about this so
需
they
要把
will
这个
know.
事情
I
告诉
especially
更多
hope
的
that
人，
young
尤其是
people
国
in
内的
China
年
will
轻
know
人，
about
希
this.
望他们去知道这些。
You used to be a Communist Party member. I'm wondering if you have officially quit?
是的，我在大学的时候其实就是共产党。
When I was in
大概在
college, I
1987
joined the Communist
那时候我还
Party
是大学生。
in
那个
1987.
时候，
At that
其实
time,
在
we
那个时候
had
就
a certain amount of faith in the party. Although we had just come out of and we were against the personality cult of Mao Zedong, we still had faith in the Communist Party. Afterwards, we found out that just opposing personality cults wasn't enough. There was something fundamentally wrong with the Communist Party as an organization. We need to have a good system. Relying on a ruling party doesn't work. But at the time, we didn't realize this. Now we've slowly realized that China can't just depend on a ruling party. We need a good system. Only then can we have a normal country and avoid tragedies like the June 4th incident. After June 4th, the Communist Party wanted me to lie. They wanted me to use my party spirit to cover up the truth. They said it was in the party's interests. I couldn't accept this because I felt the party's interests were in conflict with the people's interests, that the party spirit was against the human spirit. I couldn't accept this, so I naturally left this organization.
So I know you don't have hope for the Chinese Communist Party, but do you have hope for the future of China?
One must have hope. I do have hope for the future of China. But right now, I don't have much confidence, to be honest. There are many difficulties. In the short term, I can't see any definite reasons for hope. But we must still keep going with a hopeful attitude. Because ultimately, China will become a normal country. It will become like other countries in the world. There's no doubt about that. It's just a matter of how long it will take.
Thank you very much for sharing your story with us. I can assure you, on China Uncensored, we'll never forget the Tiananmen Square massacre.
Yes. 谢谢。
Thank you.